March 3, 1943. The Bismarck Sea, somewhere between New Guinea and New Britain. A Japanese naval convoy cuts through the turquoise waters, 8 massive transport ships flanked by 8 destroyers. Nearly 7,000 soldiers packed into steel hulls headed to reinforce Japanese positions. On the horizon, they spot something unusual, aircraft approaching, but not from above where they expected them. These planes are skimming the ocean's surface, barely 50 feet above the waves. And as they close the distance, the Japanese sailors notice something terrifying. The nose of each bomber isn't smooth. It's bristling with gun barrels, 8, 10, some with as many as 18 heavy machine guns jutting forward like the teeth of some mechanical predator. What happened next would last just 15 minutes, but it would change naval warfare forever. The question is, how did American bombers designed to drop explosives from 4 miles up transform into low-flying gunships that could shred warships like paper? And who was the man desperate enough to break every rule in the book to make it happen? Stay with me because this story gets wild. Let's rewind to 1942. And I need you to understand something. America wasn't just struggling in the Pacific. We were losing. Badly. The Philippines, fallen. Wake Island, overrun. Guam, gone. The Japanese Empire had swallowed half the Pacific Ocean in less than 6 months, and they weren't slowing down. Every week, new convoys steamed across the Bismarck and Solomon Seas, delivering fresh troops, artillery, ammunition, everything needed to fortify their conquered territories. General Douglas MacArthur, forced to flee the Philippines with that famous promise, "I shall return," was now desperately trying to hold a defensive line in New Guinea and Australia. But here's the problem. You can't hold anything if your enemy keeps getting reinforced. So what did the Allies do? They sent bombers, heavy bombers, the famous B-17 flying fortresses loaded with bombs climbing to 20,000 feet, maybe 25,000 on a good day. The plan was textbook. Fly high above the anti-aircraft fire, line up your bomb site, release your payload, and let physics do the rest. Can you guess how well that worked? It didn't. At all. Think about it. You're 4 to 5 miles up in the sky. The ship below is doing 15, maybe 20 knots, zigzagging unpredictably. You drop a bomb. It takes 30 seconds to fall. In that time, the ship has moved hundreds of feet. Your bombardier is essentially trying to hit a moving target the size of a football field from 4 miles away while the target is actively trying not to be hit. The statistics were brutal. Bombing accuracy against moving ships was less than 1%. 1%. Convoys were sailing through bomb-laden skies and arriving at their destinations virtually untouched. Japanese commanders were probably laughing at the American attempts. Meanwhile, American and Australian ground forces were being pushed back, outgunned, outnumbered. The situation was becoming desperate. Something had to change, not just tactically, fundamentally. The entire approach to attacking ships from the air needed to be torn down and rebuilt from scratch. But who was going to do that? The generals. The military strategists in their Washington offices. No, it would be a 6th-grade dropout, a mechanic, a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to lose but his life. His name was Paul Irvin Gunn, though everyone called him Pappy. Born in Arkansas in 1899, Gunn had dropped out of school after 6th grade and never looked back. He was a tinkerer, a builder, someone who understood machines in his bones. By his 20s, he'd talked his way into the Navy and somehow became one of the rarest creatures in the military, an enlisted pilot. Not an officer, not an academy graduate, just a grease monkey who could fly. After 20 years, Gunn left the Navy and moved his family to the Philippines, where he ran a small commercial airline. Life was good. He had his wife, Polly, his 4 children, a business he'd built with his own hands. And then December 1941 happened. When the Japanese invaded the Philippines, Gunn's world shattered. His family, his wife, his kids were trapped in Manila. He managed to escape to Australia, planning to somehow get back and rescue them, but he couldn't. The Japanese threw them into an internment camp, Santo Tomas, and Gunn, he was stuck in Australia thousands of miles away, helpless. Can you imagine that? Knowing your family is imprisoned, possibly starving, possibly worse, and there's nothing you can do. Well, actually, there was one thing he could do. He could kill Japanese, a lot of them. The Army Air Forces commissioned him as a captain, and Gunn threw himself into the work with the intensity of a man possessed, because he was possessed by rage, by guilt, by the desperate need to do something. Other pilots went back to their barracks after missions. Gunn went to the maintenance hangars. He studied the bombers. He watched the mission reports come in, saw the abysmal results, and asked himself one question. Why are we bombing from 20,000 feet when we could be shooting from 200? Here's what Gunn understood that the high command didn't. Ships are hard to hit from above, but they're sitting ducks from the side. Their armor is thickest on the deck and top structures because that's where they expect attacks to come from. But the sides, especially near the waterline, that's where they're vulnerable. The problem was bombers weren't designed for side attacks. They were designed to carry bombs in a bay and drop them. The nose cone housed a bombardier and maybe a single defensive machine gun. So Gunn started sketching. What if you removed the bombardier position entirely? What if you stripped out all that delicate equipment? What if you turned the entire nose into a gun platform? People thought he was crazy. This wasn't how bombers worked. This wasn't doctrine. This wasn't proper military thinking. Gunn didn't care. Proper military thinking was getting men killed and letting the Japanese win. Working alongside a civilian tech rep from North American Aviation, Gunn began his experiments. He started with the WW2 Havoc, a light bomber. He ripped out the nose, fabricated metal mounts, and bolted in 4 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns. 4 guns, that's more forward firepower than most fighters carried. But Gunn wasn't satisfied. He moved to the B-25 Mitchell, a medium bomber with a bigger airframe and more space to work with. He and his crew, a collection of mechanics who believed in his vision, started scavenging. Crashed fighters, salvaged the guns, damaged bombers, stripped the weapons. They were like vultures, but instead of picking at bones, they were harvesting firepower. The first B-25 modifications carried 4 guns, then 6, then 8, and Gunn kept pushing. Some of his later models, I want you to really picture this, carried 18 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns. 18. That's the equivalent firepower of 3 P-51 Mustang fighters, all concentrated in one bomber's nose. When those guns opened up simultaneously, they fired 8,000 rounds per minute. That's over 100 heavy machine gun bullets every single second, all converging on a target. The noise was apocalyptic. The recoil actually slowed the bomber down mid-flight. But Gunn wasn't done. Guns alone wouldn't sink ships. You needed explosives hitting below the waterline. High-altitude bombing didn't work. Low-altitude bombing had its own problems. Drop a bomb too close to the water while flying level, and it either skips over the target or your own blast kills you. So Gunn developed a new technique working with his pilots. They called it skip bombing. Here's how it worked. You come in fast, maybe 250 miles per hour, just 50 feet above the ocean. So low you can taste the salt spray. So low that if you sneeze, you die. At the last possible second, maybe 1,000 feet from the target, you release your 500-pound bombs. But here's the trick. You release them with forward momentum. The bombs hit the water and skip, just like a stone skipping across a pond. Except this stone weighs 500 pounds and is filled with high explosives. It bounces once, twice, and slams into the side of the ship right at the waterline where the armor is thinnest. The bomb punches through the hull and detonates inside, tearing the ship apart from within. And while your bombs are skipping toward the target, your 18 machine guns are raking the deck. Every anti-aircraft position is being suppressed. Every sailor running to his battle station is being cut down. The enemy can't defend themselves because they can't even stand up. It was brutal. It was ruthless. It was brilliant, but would it actually work in combat? Or was Gunn just a grief-stricken mechanic chasing a fantasy? General George Kenney, the new commander of the 5th Air Force, was a different kind of officer. He didn't care about academy credentials or proper procedure. He cared about results. When he saw what Gunn was building, he didn't shut it down. He gave Gunn carte blanche. Modify as many bombers as you can, Kenney told him. Train as many crews as you need. This works, it could change everything. By early 1943, Gunn had his squadron. Modified B-25s, pilots trained in skip bombing and low-altitude attack runs. They'd practiced on wrecked ships on simulated targets. But practice isn't combat. Combat is chaos, terror, and split-second decisions where mistakes mean death. They didn't have to wait long for the real test. Japanese intelligence had decoded American communications and believed New Guinea was vulnerable. They assembled a massive convoy, the largest they'd send across the Bismarck Sea. 8 transport ships carrying nearly 7,000 troops, 8 destroyers for protection. They planned to land at Lee, reinforce their garrison, and push the Allies out of New Guinea for good. The Allies detected the convoy on March 1st. Reconnaissance planes shadowed it, and on March 2nd, high-altitude bombers made their traditional runs. They managed to sink 1 transport, 1 out of 16 ships. The convoy pressed on. The Japanese commanders probably felt confident. If that was the best the Americans could do, they'd reach Lee without significant losses. They had no idea what was coming. March 3rd, 1943, 10:15 in the morning. The Japanese convoy was in the Bismarck Sea, northeast of New Guinea, making good time. Sailors on deck were probably relaxing, thinking the worst was behind them. Then someone pointed at the horizon. 13 B-25 Mitchells. But something was wrong. They weren't climbing. They were barely above the water, formation tight, engines screaming. On the lead bomber, Gunn's modifications glinted in the tropical sun. The Japanese sailors had seconds to realize what they were looking at before it was too late. At 800 yards, the bombers opened fire. Imagine standing on the deck of a destroyer. You look up and see 13 aircraft, and suddenly it's as if the sky itself has caught fire. Tracers, glowing bullets visible in daylight, arc toward you like shooting stars. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The air fills with the sound of ripping canvas, except it's not canvas, it's the air itself being torn apart by metal moving at 2,000 feet per second. The 50 caliber rounds hit the ships like a horizontal hailstorm. They punched through steel plating. They shredded gun emplacements. Anti-aircraft crews tried to return fire and were cut down before they could aim. Officers shouting orders were silenced mid-sentence. And then came the bombs. The lead bombers released their payloads. The 500-pounders hit the water, bounced once, twice, and slammed into the hull of the lead transport. The explosions erupted from inside the ship, blowing out the sides, sending flames and smoke boiling into the sky. The bombers swept over the convoy at masthead height, so close that some crews could see the terrified faces of Japanese soldiers on deck. Then they were passed, banking around for another run. The Japanese tried to evade, turning hard, increasing speed. But in the confined waters surrounded by other ships, there was nowhere to go. The destroyers laid down smoke screens, fired every gun they had. It didn't matter. The B-25s came in again. And again. Waves of them, some modified by Gunn, others conventional bombers now inspired to try low-altitude tactics. One transport took 3 skip bombs in succession and broke in half. Another caught fire from stem to stern, soldiers leaping into the oil-slicked water. A destroyer trying to screen the transports took a direct hit to its magazine. The explosion lifted the bow out of the water before the ship disappeared beneath the waves. 15 minutes. That's all it took. When the guns finally fell silent and the bombers turned for home, the Bismarck Sea was a graveyard. 8 transports, all of them were sinking or burning. 4 destroyers were gone. The remaining destroyers were trying to rescue survivors, but the sea was chaos. Oil fires burned on the water. Sharks, drawn by blood and bodies, were already circling. Of the 6,900 Japanese soldiers who'd boarded those transports, fewer than 1,200 would ever reach land. Over 5,000 died, drowned, burned, or torn apart by gunfire and explosions. It was, by any measure, a slaughter. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea broke the back of Japanese naval logistics in the Southwest Pacific. Never again would they attempt to send a major convoy across those waters. The risk was simply too great. Pappy guns, modified B-25s, these flying gunships that shouldn't have existed, had proven they could destroy any surface fleet that came within range. General Kenny would later write that March 3, 1943, was the day American air power proved it could dominate the vast ocean spaces of the Pacific. It was the moment when the balance of the war began to shift. But what about Pappy Gunn? He kept modifying bombers, training crews, pushing the boundaries of what aircraft could do. He became a legend in the 5th Air Force, the crazy genius who broke all the rules and saved countless Allied lives by ending enemy lives more efficiently. And his family, they survived. Against all odds, Polly and the children survived Santo Tomas internment camp. When American forces liberated Manila in 1945, Gunn was finally reunited with them. I can't imagine what that moment must have been like. 3 years of rage, grief, and desperation suddenly transformed into tears of joy. Pappy Gunn stayed in the Air Force after the war, serving until 1948. He died in 1957, largely forgotten by the public but revered by the men who'd flown his modified bombers. They knew the truth. This 6th-grade dropout, this mechanic from Arkansas, had reinvented naval aviation warfare from scratch, working out of a hangar with salvaged parts and pure determination. Here's what gets me about this story. Pappy Gunn didn't have advanced degrees. He didn't have corporate resources or unlimited funding. What he had was a problem that needed solving, the skills to solve it, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. Sometimes the greatest innovations don't come from the people at the top of the hierarchy. They come from the people in the trenches, the mechanics, the tinkerers, the ones who see the problem up close and personal and get angry enough to fix it. So the next time someone tells you that you can't do something because that's not how it's done, remember Pappy Gunn. Remember that every rule was written by someone who didn't have your problem, your perspective, or your desperation. And sometimes breaking the rules isn't just the best option. It's the only option that works. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, hit that subscribe button. There are so many untold stories from World War II, brilliant innovations, incredible acts of courage, and desperate gambles that changed the course of history. I'll be bringing you more of them. What do you think? Could you have come up with Pappy Gunn's solution? Or would you have stuck with the conventional wisdom? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, remember, Sometimes the mechanic knows more than the general.